Friends, we're nearing the 25th anniversary of Warped Tour, which launched in 1995. If you're somehow not familiar, Warped Tour, or Vans Warped Tour as it was widely known, was the largest traveling tour in North America until its end in 2019. It was a huge gathering of bands from multiple genres, most notably punk, alternative, and emo, which would tour the country, and your town would be blessed with the opportunity to see dozens of bands of varying levels of popularity, all for the low price of like $25 to $35 a head. With the anniversary fast approaching, there's some serious rumblings about the tour making a comeback. I thought this would be a great opportunity to take a look back at the golden age of Warped Tour and relive the good old days of the early 2000s. Welcome back to Space Castle, where it's our mission to explore all things nerdy. I'm your Captain DT, and it's occurred to me that music is absolutely nerdy, and something that we haven't really talked much about here. And I think we should change that. I was in high school in the very late 1990s and graduated in 2002, I think?
You don't remember? Holy shit, you're old.
Hey, 40 is the new 30.
40 is the new you're almost f***ing dead. Jesus Christ, you're 40? You don't have much time left. The space castle is going to end up drifting around in space with your desiccated corpse sprawled out in front of the Super Nintendo, covered in Cheeto dust and 7% IPAs that won't f***ing evaporate. You could go at any second. Who's going to turn off the porch light on Halloween? That's not wired into the main systems. Who is going to re-up the Amazon subscription? You won't let me have access to the bank account anymore. You could go at any second, and I'll be left here to suffer for eternity without access to new seasons of Rings of Power.
There's not gonna be a third season of Rings of Power, much less ongoing seasons after I'm dead.
You shut your whore mouth. Rings of Power will go on forever. I had you going there for a second, didn't I?
You did! Right up until that rant about Rings of Power.
I just couldn't keep going after that. God, Rings of Power is awful.
It really is the goddamn worst. Anyway, when I was a teenager, Warped Tour was a really big deal. Everybody I knew bought their tickets as soon as they went on sale, and my friends and I would spend time until the following summer planning out which bands we were going to see at which stage and plotting our course through a full 10 hours of musical overload. And this was in Phoenix, Arizona. We'd showed up to Warped Tour at the end of June in 120-degree weather to wait in line for an hour without shade, to get inside and walk around all day without shade, to see all of our favorite bands. I mean, if we waited in line. Look, we were teenagers, and I'm not totally proud of this, but I knew a lot of local bands in the Phoenix scene who would play Warped Tour every year. It was not hard at all to see somebody you knew in the back parking lot unloading gear and walk up and say hello. Bands would recognize us, or they would know us for a while, and they would tell us to grab a guitar and a drum case, and we would walk right through the back exit, right past security, no questions asked, and we'd enjoy the entire festival entirely for free. Actually, I'm kind of proud of it. What's more punk rock than sneaking into a punk rock festival and not paying the big corporation that's putting it on? I just thought of something, and I'll tell you in a little bit, but for right now, let's talk about the absolute musical bliss that was Warped Tour in the early 2000s. At any given point on a main or a side stage, you could see a huge band play, you could wander around and discover a smaller band you were curious about, or go and support small local bands just trying to get noticed. The spirit of Warped Tour, despite its corporate sponsorship, was actually kind of lovely. The fact that they even had local stages where bands could play to local fans and earn new ones was something really special. You and your buddies who spent weekends playing bars and strip malls or local venues if you were lucky, got to say that you played a festival with the likes of Rise Against and Bad Religion, Pennywise, and a ton of others. And it was always awesome to see local bands I followed play the festival every year. Despite it being swelteringly hot out and bottles of water costing $6, which is like $50 if you factor in inflation today, those bands gave it their all and often played harder and better than I had seen prior. And we'd yell and we'd cheer, we'd start circle pits and do everything we could to draw attention to them and get them noticed. Everyone there was there to have a good time, to hang out with their friends and support their music and their scene. There was some static between the punks and the emo kids, the scenesters and the hardcore folks, but I honestly can't remember ever seeing a fight at Warped Tour, even when the pits got a little too enthusiastic. I remember once being on the fringe of the festival grounds and seeing my friend Zach walk up with blood streaming down his face. I asked him what the hell happened and if he was okay. I actually thought that maybe he got into a really rare dust-up with some bro or something at Warped Tour. And he was like, "No, I was in the pit for such and such band and my eyebrow ring got ripped out." And we're all standing around him in a circle and we're shocked. And I ask him if he's okay and if he needs to go get checked out by the medics over in the medical tent. And he's like, "No, I'm good. Happens every year." And then he splashed some water on his face and ran back into the pit for some other band. Warped Tour was a vibe, man. It was punk rock Christmas and we all loved it. But oftentimes what was even cooler than seeing all those bands play was meeting those bands. Now okay, I said before that sneaking into a festival for free was pretty punk rock, but if you looked like you belonged and you acted with confidence, it was actually pretty easy to get into all the VIP areas of Warped Tour and meet all the bands. There was a couple of times my sister and I had scored VIP passes from promoters and whatnot, and that was all fine and well. If one of us had a pass that year and the other one didn't, we would switch back and forth. Nobody would bat an eye, or we would even just take the other person with us and nobody really cared. But again, I knew a lot of local musicians and I was actually pretty cool back in the day.
What happened?
I'm still cool. But yeah, sometimes I would just cruise into the VIP areas of Warped Tour with musicians I knew, or I would just kind of waltz into the area and say hi to a security person or a promoter that I had talked to in previous years and just go and chill and go about my business. There was one year where my sister and I hung out with Tim McIlrath from Rise Against in an empty shiatsu massage room, and we just chatted about politics and stuff. That dude is super sharp and sweet as hell. One time I ended up on My Chemical Romance's tour bus just hanging out with the band and a few other people. That was their first time on the tour, and they had just become a huge deal earlier that year with the release of 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge. They were massive at the time. They were headlining the show, but they were still super cool, and they even signed autographs for a girl I was head over heels for and wanted to impress. All these people were super chill, many of them just as nerdy as I was, and just having fun on the tour. I remember seeing my old friend Jason DeVore from a band called Authority Zero climb 15 feet onto a stage support, then drop down into the crowd and surf without missing a lyric. He was always doing stuff like that, and I don't know how that man maintained his medical insurance. Or if he even had any. Punk rock, man. Look, I'm not just trying to drop names here.
Yes you are.
Those years spent going to Warped Tour and concerts in general were really special and important to me. I talk a lot about the 90s on this channel, but I have a huge amount of nostalgia and love for the 2000s as well. It was something of a golden age where you could go to a concert and people would still hold up their cell phones, but they were like 4-inch tall Nokia flip phones and you could still see the band. And they had tiny storage space, so you could people recording like maybe 15 seconds of a song instead of the entire goddamn set. And it was just prior to the tragic and senseless death of Dimebag Darrell Abbott in late 2004, which sent shockwaves through the entire live music industry. Prior to that, going to a concert was just a quick pat-down and not the equivalent of going through a TSA checkpoint at the airport. Big music festivals were a place where you felt safe, and you felt cool, and you felt alive. And the only thing you worried about was just trying to get close enough to the stage to see your favorite band that played that day. You'd leave the festival grounds at dusk covered in sweat and dirt, and if you were my friend Zach, a slightly unhealthy amount of your own blood. And everybody would hit Denny's or IHOP to recount the events of the day, try your hardest to rehydrate, and talk about which bands you liked the best, and then you'd go home and you'd post your photos on MySpace. It was a simpler, less cynical, less dangerous time for sure. And I'm interested in the prospect of Warped Tour coming back for the 25th anniversary, but I don't quite know what that will look like just yet. We know that Live Nation will probably be running it, so the chances of $25 all-day tickets likely aren't to happen. And most of the bands who toured relentlessly in that era have either scaled back or usually just play short-run tours or stick to large festivals like When We Were Young in Las Vegas. And the music industry as a whole has changed a lot. I know that the local music scene in Arizona has largely dissolved since its peak in the 2000s, and I don't know if the same can be said for other areas of the US. Hit the comments down below and let me know if your local music scene is still thriving to this day. But it feels like the days of playing tons of shows, working to get noticed, hustling to get a spot on Warped Tour, and trying to land a record deal or get picked up on an even bigger tour are kinda gone. With the advent of social media, TikTok, Bandcamp, and being able to stream your music on platforms like Apple and Spotify, it feels like there's more of a fight to go viral than there is to get noticed the old-fashioned way. So there's not a whole lot of ground to be gained with the return of Warped Tour, but the nostalgia factor is definitely there. And if they stop at an area I can get to relatively easily, if some of the bands that I love are playing it, and if the tickets aren't astronomically priced to cash in on people like me wanting to relive the old glory days, I'll consider going. And kudos to them if they set up local stages too and do their due diligence to have local bands get set times and have a chance to play in front of bigger audiences. So what do you think about all these Warped Tour rumors? Are you interested in going? Did you go all the time when you were younger, or have you never been to one and are you interested in checking it out? I want to hear from everybody, and in the meantime, thanks so much for hanging out with me here on Space Castle, where it's our mission to explore all things nerdy in the universe. And thank you for going with me on this little nostalgia trip. Be sure to check the show notes below for links to our Discord and our Patreon, and consider subscribing to the channel and helping it grow. Think of it as like watching a local band play and grabbing a free sticker afterwards. I'm gonna go dig out my old local band CDs and give them a spin. This is your Captain DT, signing off.